All right, well, before we talk about the inverted Jenny, we have to talk about the Jenny stamp. It is the world's first government airmail service stamp. It was issued in 1918, so, World War I is going on. They want to give a patriotic tribute, so they put a stamp in red, white, and blue. They get the best engravers, the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, to work on it. Oddly enough, it doesn't say airmail on it, even though it's intended for the first airmail service. It just says U.S. Postage, and it's 24-cent rate. And the whole thing was a mess and a rush to begin with. So the JN, the Jenny, was used by the military for training purposes, and it had 2 seats in it. And for airmail purposes, the military modified the plane, had Curtiss, the manufacturer, seal up that front seat and turn it into a mail compartment. And so one pilot would fly the mail from place to place in this biplane. They made 6 planes for a route that would run from Washington, D.C. to New York, and they had 3 legs: Washington, Philadelphia, and New York. So they were going to put 2 planes in each city, at each airfield, and you can imagine it's like a relay. One lands, they get in another, they hand the mail off, they go up on the next leg of the trip, and they have pilots positioned in different places to do this relay. So they had the first flight scheduled for May 15th, and this was a big deal. Public officials were going to gather, the president would be there, and they were a mess. They didn't even have the planes assembled till a couple of weeks before. They didn't have the stamps printed until days before the post office would open up and sell the stamps to people. And in this rush, they made invert sheets. Only one sheet got out, the other ones were destroyed. And the way the invert occurred is it's like a guessing game. It's a mystery. We're trying to figure out why this happened. So let's talk about the invert. It's like I said, a red, white, and blue stamp. It's got the blue printed portion of the stamp, the plane, flying upside down. And we know that it's a plane inverted because that was the second part of the stamp printed. They printed the red frame first, and then they printed the blue vignette. So what did a sheet of regular stamps look like? Well, the first sheets looked like this. A sheet of 100. They had to trim them to fit into the post office boxes when they sold them. So they were trimmed at the top and the right. And we know the direction the perforations were applied in the machine because there's a tiny little gap between 2 perfs down here. You can see it on this sheet. And on a couple of the inverts, when they're joined together, you can see that same blind perf hole is what we call it. That tells us how the sheets were perforated, the direction. And along one side, they would have a knife which would cut in this direction, then they would perforate them in the other direction and cut this way. This is important because when the stamps were issued, they had straight edges at the top and the right, and everybody assumed, like other stamps with straight edges, no perforations at the top and the right, they assumed that a full sheet of 400 was inverted and that they would find other sheets. And so when news of the invert got out, everybody was scrambling, running to post offices, trying to find sheets. So in Washington, D.C., there was a collector named William Roby. And he'd been dabbling and dealing in stamps and writing with different dealers. And in a letter he wrote to a friend a few days before, he said, I think there could be an invert, just the same way there was when the 1901 Pan American issue came out. So I'm going to be on the lookout for that. So William Roby leaves his office in the morning and goes down to the post office to buy a sheet of stamps with $24. And I think he was told to come back, or it didn't, the first time he went down there, according to his account, they weren't ready, so he came back. And when he waited on the line, and when he went up to the counter, to the clerk, he was handed a sheet just like this, and right away he could see that the planes were printed upside down. He was on the lookout for it, and he found it, and as he described it, his heart stood still. So as soon as he bought it at the post office, the clerk realized what happened and shut the window and ran to his superiors and told them about it. They actually sent 2 agents around to Roby's office and tried to recover the sheet. He told him he had to hand it over, it was government property. He refused to do it. So he had his winning lottery ticket in the form of 100 inverted Jenny stamps, and he knew they were worth a lot of money. It's ironic when we think about how valuable they are today, but when Roby went around trying to sell these and contacted different dealers, they weren't very enthusiastic. A lot of people had been burned on an era that came out a year before where it was thought to be very, very rare, and it turned out there were lots of them. So the dealers weren't too anxious to buy these first 100. They thought, well, maybe there are going to be lots of stamps out there. And in fact, an expert told Roby that there should be 300 more because the straight edges indicated that 400 were printed at one time, but that wasn't the case. So Roby's gone, dealer to dealer. He took a trip up to New York. It was very disappointing. Somebody made him a $500 offer for the sheet, and I think he was pretty discouraged. But then he got a bite. A dealer in Philadelphia, just outside Philadelphia, named Eugene Klein, told him that he had a party who would pay him $15,000 for the sheet. And Roby accepted the offer. And so he and his father-in-law got on a train. They went to Philadelphia. They met with Klein. He looked at the sheet, he took it. They took the check for $15,000, and that was his windfall. And from that moment on, Roby was always associated with the sheet, even when it was broken up into lots of different units. So what happened to the sheet when Klein bought it? Well, he actually bought it for a collector named Edward H.R. Green. Colonel Green was his name. And Colonel Green was the son of Hetty Green, who was one of the wealthiest women in the world, one of the wealthiest people in the world. I think when she died in 1917, she left an estate worth something like $115 million. That's $2-3 billion today. But Colonel Green, after he inherited his mother's money, he and his sister split the estate. Colonel Green went on a collecting binge, and he bought coins and stamps and jewelry. He even had a diamond-encrusted toilet made. Eugene Klein had arranged for Colonel Green to buy the inverted Jenny sheet, and Colonel Green gave Klein the instructions to split it up, and he would keep the choices, blocks and pieces out of it, and Klein would sell off the rest of the stamps. One of the stamps from the top with a straight edge he had put into a locket that was made for Mabel, who was his wife. She was an exotic dancer from Texas who his mother disapproved of. But on the other hand, since he wouldn't marry her, she thought the family money was safe. In any case, Mabel got her locket. The stamps were split up. Some of the blocks were kept by Colonel Green. One block Klein actually bought for himself. And then the other stamps went many different places, and we've actually tracked them over the years. On invertedjenny.com, we have a reconstruction of the sheet. So each position from 1 through 100, which was numbered on the back by Eugene Klein, each numbered position has a history to it, where it's been. And there's one position which only surfaced in recent years, and I believe didn't trade hands more than once or twice since 1918 when the sheet was discovered. Knowing what we know about the sheet, and that means we know what the condition is of all 100 stamps, we can safely say that position 49, that's the stamp that we'll be offering, is the finest that exists. It's not the finest known, it's just the finest that can exist, because there is no other stamp centered like this, which graded 95, and with perfect, pristine, mint never hinged gum, just like it was when the sheet was bought at the post office. Because this stamp was sold early on, Colonel Green didn't have it, and he didn't take great care of his stamps, so this one was put away in a safe deposit box. It was kept in the dark. It really is one of the freshest, most beautiful examples of the stamp I've ever seen. And the certificates, which were issued by the Philatelic Foundation and professional stamp experts, they confirm it. They grade the stamp 95 and describe it as never hinged. It's exciting. I mean, I've sold 2/3 of the original sheet of 100. I think that's a record for anybody alive or dead, other than maybe William Roby and Eugene Klein. And having handled a big part of the sheet, it's obvious this stamp is the finest that comes out of the sheet.